came home to a nightmare, his ranch stolen, his identity questioned, and a stranger calling him the trespasser, framed and cast out. Jack Carter's fight for his land uncovers a truth far more sinister than a stolen home. What dark secrets lie hidden on his property? And can he reclaim his life before it's too late? Don't miss this shocking tale of betrayal and justice. This is my property. What in God's name are you doing in my house? Jack Carter's voice, usually a calm baritone accustomed to calling cattle across wide pastures, now cracked with a mixture of disbelief and rising fury. The midday sun beat down on the dusty driveway of his sprawling Montana ranch, a property that had been in the Carter family for 3 generations. He'd cut his business trip short by 2 days, a nagging unease in his gut he couldn't shake, only to return to this surreal nightmare. Standing on his porch, arms crossed, a woman he'd never seen before glared back at him. She was in her 50s, like him, but where he wore the comfortable denim and weathered Stetson of a lifelong rancher. She was clad in a bright red tracksuit that seemed to scream defiance against the rustic backdrop of his home. Behind her, peeking through the screen door, were 2 unfamiliar children, a boy and a girl, roughly the ages of his own sons, Ethan and Lucas, who were supposed to be with their grandparents for the week. "Your property, the woman scoffed, her voice sharp and nasal. "I think you're mistaken. Buddy, this is my house. Now, I suggest you get off my land before I call the sheriff." Jack felt a wave of dizziness. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a prank gone way too far. He took a step closer, his hand instinctively going to the small of his back, where no firearm rested. He was a rancher, not a gunslinger, though the raw, primal urge to defend his home was thrumming through him like a live wire. "Your house, lady. I built that extension on the barn with my own 2 hands. My name, Jack Carter, is on the deed, on the mailbox, on every damn piece of paper associated with this ranch for the last 30 years. He gestured wildly towards the mailbox at the end of the drive. A sturdy wooden post with the Carters clearly, if a little fadedly, painted on its side. The woman, Karen Mitchell as he would soon learn her name was, didn't even glance at it. Instead, she pulled a cell phone from the pocket of her tracksuit. "That's it. You're trespassing, and you're clearly unstable. I'm calling 911. "You're calling 911, Jack roared, his composure finally snapping. "I'm the one who should be calling them. You're the trespasser." He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of outrage. His boys, Ethan and Lucas, were they safe, his loyal golden retriever? Buster, where was he? A new, colder wave of fear washed over the anger. Before he could articulate his next demand, the woman was already speaking into her phone, her voice taking on a saccharine, victimized tone that made Jack's stomach churn. "Yes, hello. There's a man here, trespassing on my property. He's very aggressive. I'm scared for myself and my children." Jack stared, aghast. She was twisting the narrative, painting him as the aggressor. He could hear the faint, excited yelps of his sons in his memory, their laughter echoing in the vast emptiness that now seemed to surround his own home. This couldn't be happening. He saw movement from the side of the house. Buster, his beautiful golden retriever, came trotting around the corner, tail wagging tentatively, but instead of bounding towards Jack, the dog stopped, looking confused, glancing between Jack and the woman on the porch. Then, one of the unfamiliar children, the boy, called out, "Max, come here, Max!" And to Jack's utter horror, his Buster, trotted towards the strange boy, wagging his tail more enthusiastically. They'd even renamed his dog. The betrayal, even from his usually loyal companion, felt like a physical blow. The woman, Karen, gave a smug little smile as she continued her call. "Yes, he's still here. He looks dangerous. Please hurry." Jack felt a cold dread seep into his bones, chilling him despite the Montana sun. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a calculated invasion. How had she gotten in? Where were his belongings? His mind raced, trying to piece together the impossible. He'd locked up tight, as he always did. Old man Hemlock from the neighboring ranch was supposed to keep an eye on things. But Hemlock was in his 80s, his eyesight failing. The minutes stretched into an eternity, filled with the woman's dramatic pronouncements to the 911 operator and Jack's own stunned silence, his brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of the situation. He could see his son's swing set in the yard, the tire swing hanging still, a monument to a life that, just hours ago, had been his. Now, it felt like he was looking at a stage set, and he was an unwelcome intruder in his own play. Finally, in the distance, he heard the wail of a siren. Relief warred with apprehension. The police would sort this out. They had to. He was Jack Carter. Everyone in the county knew his ranch. But as the patrol car, a familiar Ford Explorer from the Park County Sheriff's Department, crunched up his driveway, and two deputies stepped out, their faces stern and unreadable. A new fear began to dawn. Karen Mitchell, still on the phone, pointed a trembling finger at him and, "That's him. Officers, that's the man who's been threatening us." Deputy Miller, a man Jack had known for years, a man who'd eaten at his table during the annual Carter Ranch barbecue, looked at him, then at the woman, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Carter, what's going on here?" Before Jack could even open his mouth, Karen interjected, her voice dripping with false fire. "He just showed up, officer, started screaming that this was his house. We've been living here for a week. He's scaring my children." She gestured to the two kids now clinging to her legs, their eyes wide. "A week," Jack exclaimed, his voice hoarse. "I've been gone 5 days. What kind of madness is this?" He turned to Miller. "Mark, you know me. This is my ranch. My family has owned this land since 1923. Miller held up a hand. "All right, Jack, calm down." "Ma'am, can you tell us your name?" "Karen Mitchell," she replied, puffing up slightly. "And this is my home. I have the paperwork to prove it." Jack felt the ground shift beneath him. Paperwork. What paperwork could she possibly have? He looked at the deputies, appealing to them. "This is insane. She's a squatter, a con artist." Deputy Rodriguez, Miller's younger partner, spoke up. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation for your residence here?" Karen nodded eagerly. "Of course, officer. It's right inside. If you'll excuse me." She gave Jack a look of pure triumph and disappeared into his house. His house. The violation was a physical ache in his chest, while she was gone. Jack tried to reason with Miller. "Mark, you've been here countless times. You know my boys. You know Buster, or Max as they're apparently calling him now." He gestured towards the dog, who was now sitting placidly at the strange boy's feet. Miller's gaze was troubled. "I know, Jack, but we have to follow procedure. She claims to live here. She called us." Karen returned, holding a sheaf of papers. She handed them to Rodriguez, who began to look through them, his brow furrowed. Jack craned his neck, trying to see. They looked like some kind of lease agreement. Official, stamped. His blood ran cold. "How this appears to be a rental agreement. Notarized," Rodriguez said, looking up at Jack, then back at Karen. "It says you leased this property, fully furnished, starting a week ago, from a Carter Management LLC. Jack's mind blanked. Carter Management LLC. He'd never heard of it. He didn't have a management company. He managed his own damn ranch. "That's a fake. It has to be. There's no such company. I am the owner. Jack Carter, sole owner." Karen Mitchell put a hand to her chest. "Oh, I knew he'd be difficult. The rental agent warned me the previous occupant might cause trouble when he found out the bank had foreclosed and leased it out." Foreclosed. The word hit Jack like a sledgehammer. His ranch wasn't foreclosed. He was current on his mortgage. Always had been. This was a carefully constructed lie, A web of deceit so audacious it was almost brilliant in its wickedness. Foreclosed, Jack repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. That's impossible. I own this ranch outright, free and clear for the last 10 years. This was a lie he could dismantle, but the lease agreement was a tangible problem. Miller looked at Jack, a flicker of something, pity doubt in his eyes. Jack, do you have your deed, your mortgage statements, anything to prove ownership here with you? Of course, he didn't. Not on him. He was just back from a trip. All his important papers were in the safe. In the house this woman was now claiming as her own, with a seemingly legitimate, if fraudulent, lease in her hand. He was locked out, not just physically, but by a wall of fabricated documents in a system that seemed, in this initial, shocking confrontation, to be tilting away from him. He felt the tendrils of a carefully laid trap closing around him. This wasn't just a random act of squatting. This was something more sinister, more planned. Karen Mitchell stood there, the picture of aggrieved innocence, while he, the rightful owner, was being made to look like a dangerous fool on his own land. The deputies were caught in the middle, bound by procedure, and he was the one without immediate proof. The irony was a bitter pill. He had returned home to find his entire life upended, his identity questioned, and his sanctuary defiled, all before he'd even had a chance to set down his travel bag. The fight for his home, he realized with a sinking heart, had just begun, and he was already on the defensive. Deputy Miller sighed, the sound heavy with the discomfort of the situation. He exchanged a look with Rodriguez, who still held the sheaf of papers Karen had provided. Jack, Miller began, his voice taking on a formal tone that chilled Jack to the bone. This document, on its face, appears to be a legitimate lease agreement. It's notarized. It states that Ms. Mitchell here has lawful tenancy of this residence. Lawful tenancy, Mark. Are you listening to yourself? This is my home. I have a deed, not a lease. My name is on the mortgage, which is paid off. Jack's voice was rising again, a desperate edge creeping in. He felt like he was in a nightmare, one where all logic was inverted. And we'll certainly need to see that, Jack, Rodriguez interjected, his gaze steady but not unkind. But right now, Ms. Mitchell has presented documentation suggesting she has a right to be here. You say this Carter Management LLC is fraudulent and the foreclosure claim is false. Those are serious allegations, and they'll need to be investigated. But that investigation, in proving the fraudulent nature of this lease, will likely have to happen through civil court. Civil court, Jack echoed, the words feeling foreign and ominous. You mean you're not going to make her leave? The very idea was an affront to every notion of justice he held. Karen, who had been watching the exchange with an air of vindicated righteousness, stepped forward slightly. Officers, I've told you, I leased this property in good faith. I have 2 young children. We moved all our belongings here. This man, she gestured at Jack with a dismissive wave, is clearly disturbed. He's trying to intimidate us. I don't feel safe with him on the premises. You don't feel safe, Jack only spun on her, his fists clenching. You break into my home. You lie to the police. You try to steal my life. And you don't feel safe. He took a step toward the porch, his patience worn paper thin. Jack, Miller's voice was sharp, a clear warning. Don't make this worse for yourself. Right now, this is a dispute over tenancy. If you try to force your way in or threaten Ms. Mitchell, it becomes something else, something criminal. The word criminal hung in the air, a stark and terrifying possibility. Jack, a man who'd never had so much as a speeding ticket, was being warned about criminal charges on his own property. He looked at the deputies, then at Karen Mitchell, whose lips were curved in a barely perceptible smirk. She was winning. This woman, this stranger, was systematically dismantling his life with a stack of papers and a brazen performance. He thought of Ethan and Lucas. He'd promised to take them fishing at Willow Creek when he got back. Their fishing rods were probably still propped up in the mudroom, right where they'd left them. His family photos were on the mantelpiece inside, his grandfather's rocking chair by the fireplace. Every inch of that house was imbued with his memories, his heritage. And now he was being told he couldn't even step inside. "So, what am I supposed to do?" Jack asked, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Just walk away. Let her stay in my house, with my things." The injustice was a burning coal in his chest. "For now," Miller said, clearly uncomfortable, "we can't forcibly remove Mrs. Mitchell based on what we've seen. She has a document that, until proven otherwise in court, gives her residency. You need to contact an attorney, Jack, immediately. They can help you file for an emergency eviction, or whatever the correct legal process is to challenge this lease and prove your ownership unequivocally." Rodriguez added, "We will file a report detailing both your claims. We'll note the existence of her lease and your assertion of ownership and fraud, but our hands are tied in terms of immediate removal. If you have your ownership documents, the deed, mortgage satisfaction, tax records, your lawyer will need those." "They're in the house," Jack said flatly. "In my office, in the safe." Karen Mitchell's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, calculation, crossing her face before she smoothed her expression back into one of polite concern. "Officers, I'm happy to cooperate, of course, but I can't have him rummaging through the house. I don't know what he might do. Perhaps if one of you escorted him to get his papers." Miller looked at Rodriguez. "We can facilitate that, Jack, if you can tell us exactly where these papers are. One of us can accompany you to retrieve only those specific documents. Ms. Mitchell, would you be agreeable to that, to help clarify this situation?" Karen hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose that would be acceptable. Only his personal legal papers related to the house, nothing else. And I'd want an officer present with him the entire time he's inside." It was a small concession, but it felt like a monumental hurdle. The idea of being escorted into his own home like a potential thief was galling, but he needed those papers. They were his lifeline. "My office is the second door on the right down the main hallway," Jackson said, his voice tight. "The safe is in the closet." Deputy Rodriguez nodded. "Okay, Jack, let's go. Ms. Mitchell, if you would unlock the door." Karen produced a key, his key, or a copy, and unlocked the front door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding back, a sound he'd heard thousands of times, now felt like a betrayal, as Rodriguez followed him in. Jack's eyes scanned the living room. It was subtly changed. Small, unfamiliar knickknacks on the end tables. A different throw on his favorite armchair. It was like looking at a distorted reflection of his life. Buster, or Max, whined softly from the porch, kept outside by Karen. The dog's confusion mirrored Jack's own turmoil. In his office, the changes were more jarring. His desk, usually meticulously organized, was cluttered with unfamiliar stationery and what looked like children's drawings. His computer was on. A screensaver he didn't recognize idly drifting across the monitor. He gritted his teeth and went to the closet. Rodriguez watching him closely. The small, heavy safe was still there. He knelt, his fingers fumbling slightly with the combination lock. A lock whose numbers were as familiar to him as his own name. The click of the mechanism opening was a small victory in a losing battle. Inside, thankfully, his important documents were undisturbed: the deed to the ranch, title stamped and bearing his parents' names and then his, the final mortgage payoff statement from 10 years ago, recent property tax receipts, his passport and other identification. He gathered them, his hands shaking slightly, acutely aware of Rodriguez's presence, of Karen Mitchell's shadow falling across the hallway from the living room where she was undoubtedly listening. As he stood, clutching the manila envelope containing the proof of his entire life's work, he saw it, tucked innocuously on the corner of his desk, partially obscured by a garish ceramic mug he'd never seen before. Was a business card. It was simple, cream-colored, with embossed black lettering, Carter Management LLC, Property Services, Helena, Montana, and beneath it, a phone number and a generic email address. His blood ran cold. She had put it there, or someone had. It was a plant, a taunt, a piece of the elaborate puzzle of this deception. He picked it up, his gaze locking with Rodriguez's. "This," Jack said, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "This is the company on that fraudulent lease. It's right here, in my office." Well, Rodriguez took the card, examined it, and then put it in an evidence bag he produced from his kit. "We'll look into this." Jack. Back outside, the sun seemed to have lost some of its warmth. Karen Mitchell stood with her arms crossed, a picture of false patience. Jack held up the envelope. "I have my papers." Miller nodded. "Good. Now, Jack, the unfortunate reality is, until a judge says otherwise, Ms. Mitchell has a right to occupy the house based on the lease she's presented. We cannot force her to leave today. We also cannot allow a breach of the peace." This means, when he paused, his gaze apologetic but firm, that if Ms. Mitchell does not want you on the premises, you will have to leave the property. The words hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. Leave his own ranch, be cast out like a vagrant. Karen seized her moment. "Officers," she said, her voice laced with feigned distress, "I am truly sorry it has come to this, but given his agitation and his threats, I do not feel safe with him here, for the sake of my children. I have to ask that he leave." Jack stared at her, then at Miller and Rodriguez. He saw the regret in Miller's eyes, the procedural adherence in Rodriguez's. They were trapped by the system just as he was. He was being legally evicted from his own life by a con artist with a piece of paper. "You can't be serious," Jack whispered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, hollowing despair. His gaze drifted to the fields stretching out beyond the house. The fields his grandfather had cleared, his father had tilled, and he had nurtured. His legacy, and he was being told to walk away from it. "I'm afraid we are, Jack," Miller said quietly. "We're not taking sides, but we have to prevent any escalation. You can stay on the public road, but for now, you can't remain on the ranch property itself if she, as the current leaseholder, objects." The twist of the knife was brutal. He was not just locked out of his house, but banished from his land. He felt the eyes of his ancestors on him, the weight of their legacy. He thought of his sons, who would be devastated. He thought of Buster, confused and now in the hands of strangers, with a final venomous glare from Karen Mitchell, who then retreated into his house with a triumphant flick of her red tracksuit. Jack Carter, owner of the Carter Ranch, was escorted off his own property by the Park County Sheriff's Department. He stood by the side of the dusty county road, his envelope of papers clutched in his hand like a worthless shield, watching the patrol car drive away, leaving him alone with the dust, the fading sun, and the crushing weight of the impossible. The ranch, his sanctuary, now stood before him as a fortress occupied by the enemy. The fight had escalated beyond his worst imaginings. He was an exile in his own kingdom. The dust from the departing patrol car settled slowly, coating Jack Carter in a gritty film that felt like the physical manifestation of his despair. He stood by the county road, the envelope of his life's proof clutched in a white-knuckled grip, watching the familiar silhouette of his ranch house, now an enemy stronghold, against the vast Montana sky. The sun, beginning its slow descent, cast long, mournful shadows. He was in exile. A cold fury began to replace the initial shock in despair. This Karen Mitchell, whoever she was, had underestimated him. She saw a simple rancher. She didn't see the tenacity forged by generations of Carters who had battled blizzards, droughts, and economic hardships to hold onto this land. He wouldn't just walk away. He couldn't. His first call was to Martha DeGamos, the sharpest lawyer in Livingston, maybe even the state. Her voice, usually brisk and no-nonsense, softened with disbelief as Jack recounted the bizarre events. She has a lease for the Carter Ranch, Jack. That's, that's preposterous. Your title is as clean as a newly minted dollar. Tell that to Deputies Miller and Rodriguez, Martha, and to Karen Mitchell, who's currently making herself at home in my kitchen, probably using my coffee mugs. The bitterness was raw in his voice. She had papers, notarized, some sham LLC, Carter Management LLC. It's a phantom, a sophisticated phantom, if it fooled the deputies enough to make you leave. Martha mused. Okay, Jack, don't engage with her further. Don't go back on the property. No matter how tempted you are, that's crucial right now. We need to fight this legally and swiftly. Email me copies of everything you have, the deed, the mortgage satisfaction, those tax receipts. And that business card, I want to see it all. I'll start drafting an emergency petition for wrongful eviction and a restraining order first thing in the morning. We'll also file for discovery on this LLC. The conversation with Martha, though sobering about the legal road ahead, fanned the embers of Jack's fighting spirit. He wasn't alone in this. He drove to his brother's place in Bozeman, an hour away, explaining the situation to his younger brother. Tom and his wife, Sarah, was like reliving the nightmare. Their outrage mirrored his own. She did what Tom, a burly construction manager, looked ready to drive to the ranch himself. No, Tom, Jack said, holding up a hand. Martha was clear. No confrontations. This has to be by the book, or I'll play right into that woman's hands. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, frantic calls, and sleepless nights spent on Tom's sofa. Martha filed the emergency petitions. The court, however, was backlogged. A hearing was scheduled, but not for another 10 agonizing days. 10 days during which Karen Mitchell would be living in his home, sleeping in his bed, her children playing with his son's toys. The violation was a constant, throbbing ache. He had to call his sons, Ethan and Lucas, at their grandparents. The lie he concocted, that there was an unexpected plumbing issue at the ranch and it was better for them to stay longer, tasted like ash in his mouth. Their disappointed voices were like daggers to his heart. Martha's investigator, a retired state trooper named Finn, started digging into Carter Management LLC and Karen Mitchell. The LLC was freshly minted, registered just 3 weeks prior with a P.O. box address in Helena that turned out to be a mail forwarding service. The registered agent was a generic incorporation service. It was a ghost company, designed for anonymity. Karen Mitchell was harder to pin down. She had a sparse, carefully curated online presence, a few Odine social media profiles with generic posts about positive thinking and happy families. Finn found a string of previous addresses in different states, short-term rentals, and a couple of civil lawsuits for unpaid debts. Quickly settled. There was no clear criminal record, but a pattern of transience and what looked like financial opportunism. She's a grifter, Jack, Finn reported. A professional one, it seems. This isn't her first rodeo, though this land grab is a bold move, even for her type. The waiting was the hardest part. Jack felt impotent. He drove past his ranch several times a day, parking on the county road, just watching. He saw unfamiliar cars come and go. He saw Karen Mitchell in his garden, tending to his wife's roses as if she owned them. Once, he saw the two strange children riding his son's bikes in the driveway. Buster, his loyal Golden, was often with them, looking well cared for, which was a small, strange comfort mixed with a fresh stab of betrayal. The dog seemed to have accepted his new reality faster than Jack could. One evening, driven by a desperate need to do something, Jack parked further down the road, hidden by a copse of cottonwoods, and pulled out a pair of powerful binoculars he kept in his truck. He scanned his property. Lights were on in the living room and kitchen. He saw Karen Mitchell moving about. Then he saw a man. The man was tall, dressed in a dark suit, and had an air of urban slickness that was entirely out of place on a Montana ranch. He wasn't one of the locals Jack had seen visiting. This man stood on the porch with Karen, an open briefcase resting on the railing. They were looking at papers, their heads close together, even from a distance. Their conversation seemed intense. Karen was gesturing animatedly. The man seemed to be explaining something, pointing at the documents. Who was this man? Her lawyer, a partner in this scam. The sight of him, so clearly in league with Karen on his porch, discussing his property, sent a fresh wave of cold anger through Jack. This wasn't just Karen Mitchell acting alone. This was organized. He watched until the man packed his briefcase, shook Karen's hand, and drove away in a late-model black sedan with out-of-state plates, California. Jack thought, though he couldn't be sure from that distance. He immediately called Finn. There was a man at the ranch with Karen, looked like a city lawyer or businessman, dark suit, black sedan. He described the encounter. Finn was intrigued. That's new. She hasn't had any male visitors of that description before, according to my discreet inquiries with your neighbors. Can you get a plate number if he shows up again? I'll try, Jack promised, a new sense of purpose hardening his resolve. He wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. There were hidden players. The next day, Martha called with a sliver of good news. The notary who supposedly authenticated that lease, their license expired 2 months ago, and they reported their official stamp stolen last month. We have an affidavit from them. That lease is almost certainly invalid on that basis alone. Jack, a surge of triumph, the first he'd felt in days, washed over him. So, that's it, we win. Not so fast, Martha cautioned. It's a strong piece of evidence, a very strong one. It means the lease she presented is fraudulent. But we still need the judge to rule, and we need to understand how she got this document, who created Carter Management LLC, and if there are other forgeries we don't know about. This might be bigger than just one woman squatting. That man you saw could be a part of it. The revelation about the notary was a significant shift. The power dynamic, so heavily skewed towards Karen, was beginning to teeter. She had built her claim on a foundation of lies, and the cracks were starting to show. Jack decided he couldn't just sit and wait for the hearing. He needed to know more about what was happening on his land. Old Man Hemlock, his elderly neighbor, while frail, still had a sharp mind and eyes that missed little from his porch overlooking a section of Jack's back pastures. Jack paid him a visit. Saw that woman all right? Hemlock rasped, his voice like dry leaves. Strutting around like she owns the place. And that city feller you mentioned, saw him too. Came twice now, always in the evening. Hemlock squinted. There's something else. Jack, trucks, late at night, not big rigs, more like panel vans or enclosed trailers. No markings. They go down your old access road, the one that leads to the far west quarter. Near the bluffs, don't use the main drive. They're quiet about it. Jack's blood ran cold. The far west quarter was remote, mostly unused scrubland bordering national forest. What could they possibly be doing out there? In the dead of night, it wasn't ranching activity. What do you think they're up to, Mr. Hemlock? The old man just shook his head slowly. Ain't my business to guess, but it ain't right, Jack. It ain't right what they're doing to you, to your land. Hidden truths were surfacing, painting a far more sinister picture than Jack had initially imagined. This wasn't just about stealing a house. It was about something happening on his land, something that required secrecy in late-night movements. The stakes were higher than he thought. His resistance, initially focused on regaining his home, now broadened. He had to uncover what Karen Mitchell and her mysterious associate were truly after. The fight was no longer just about his front door. It was about the integrity of his entire ranch. Armed with Hemlock's information and the news about the fraudulent notary, Jack felt a renewed determination. The power was shifting. However slowly, he had evidence, he had allies, and he had the unshakable conviction of a man fighting for his legacy. Karen Mitchell had started a war, and Jack Carter was now preparing his counteroffensive. He would get his ranch back, and he would expose whatever dark dealings were unfolding under the cover of her audacious charade. The information from Mr. Hemlock about the clandestine nightly activities on the far west quarter of his ranch ignited a new, more urgent fire in Jack Carter. This was no longer just about a fraudulent lease in a brazen squatter. Something far more sinister was unfolding on his land. Under the cloak of Karen Mitchell's occupation, the upcoming court date to challenge the lease felt too distant, too passive, given this new, alarming development. Jack, with his brother Tom and Martha's investigator Finn, decided on a reconnaissance mission, armed with night vision binoculars in a determination to reclaim more than just his house. They positioned themselves on a ridge overlooking the old access road to the west quarter. A few nights after Jack's conversation with Hemlock, the wait was tense, the Montana night air cold and sharp. Just after 2 a.m., their patience was rewarded. Two dark-colored panel vans, their headlights off until they were well onto the private track, rumbled slowly toward the dilapidated old line shack and disused corral in the remote section of the ranch. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, through the night vision gear. They watched as figures emerged. Karen Mitchell was there, surprisingly, directing two men as they unloaded heavy-looking wooden crates from the vans into the old shack. And overseeing the operation, standing slightly apart with an air of authority, was the same slickly dressed man Jack had seen on his porch, Alistair Finch. As Finn had tentatively identified him from a grainy photo Jack had managed to snap from a distance and some cross-referencing with known associates of high-end grifters. He's not just a lawyer or a casual visitor, Finn whispered, recording everything with a high-definition camera. He's running this show, and she's his field manager. They watched for over an hour as crate after crate was moved. The operation was quiet, efficient, and clearly well-practiced. What could be in those crates? The remoteness of the location, the secrecy, the expense of setting up such an elaborate ruse with the fraudulent lease. It all pointed to something high value and highly illegal. Before dawn, the vans departed as silently as they had arrived, leaving Finch and Mitchell to lock up the old shack. As Finch's black sedan eventually drove him away, and Karen returned to the main house, Jack and his team carefully retreated, their minds racing. Finn, an ex-trooper with a nose for serious crime, was grim. Those aren't farming supplies. Jack, given Finch's suspected connections, we could be looking at anything from stolen art to counterfeit goods, maybe even weapons, the kind of stuff that needs to be kept off the grid until it can be moved on. Martha was immediately looped in. The evidence Finn had gathered, clear video footage of the nocturnal operation, Finch's presence, the secretive nature of it all, combined with the now confirmed fraudulent notary stamp on the lease, painted a damning picture. It was enough to bypass the slower civil court route for the lease and go straight to the county sheriff with probable cause for criminal activity. This time, when Jack, Martha, and Finn presented their evidence to Sheriff Brody, Miller and Rodriguez's superior, the reception was markedly different. The sheriff, a man who valued the peace and integrity of his county, listened intently, his expression hardening as the video played. The fraudulent lease was bad enough, but a potential criminal enterprise using a local ranch as its hub was an immediate call to action. This changes things considerably. Jack, Sheriff Brody said, his voice firm, this isn't just a tenancy dispute anymore. We'll secure a warrant for the entire property based on this evidence of suspected illegal storage and trafficking. We move tonight. The hours leading up to the raid were the longest of Jack's life. He wasn't allowed to participate directly, a bitter pill, but he understood. He waited at Tom's house, pacing, while a county SWAT team alongside federal agents Finn had discreetly alerted due to the potential interstate nature of the crimes prepared to descend on Carter Ranch. The news came via a call from Sheriff Brody just before sunrise. Jack, it's done. We secured the property. Ms. Mitchell is in custody. Mr. Alistair Finch was apprehended attempting to flee the state line about an hour ago. Seems he got spooked. The line shack Well, Finn was on the right track. It was full of stolen antiquities. Priceless stuff, apparently, lifted from a museum in California a few months back. Your ranch was the hiding spot. Relief so potent it made his knees weak. Washed over Jack. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Karen Mitchell's composure, Jack later heard, had shattered the moment heavily armed officers swarmed the ranch house. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of serious federal charges, her entitled arrogance had crumbled, replaced by a desperate, failed attempt to feign ignorance. Alistair Finch, the smooth operator, had apparently maintained his cool demeanor, but the evidence against him was irrefutable. The fraudulent lease for Carter Ranch was a carefully constructed cog in his criminal machine, designed to provide a secure, seemingly legitimate location to store his stolen goods while the heat died down. Carter Management LLC was his creation, one of many such shell companies. The following morning, Jack Carter walked back onto his land, not as an exile, but as its rightful owner, fully vindicated. The yellow police tape still crisscrossed parts of his property, a stark reminder of the ordeal. But the air felt cleaner, the sun brighter. Deputy Miller was there, overseeing the last of the official procedures at the main house. He approached Jack, his hand outstretched. "Jack, we owe you an apology for how this initially played out. Our hands were tied by that lease, but I'm glad the truth came out, and justice is being served." Jack shook his hand. "I understand. Mark, you were doing your job. Just glad it's over." Stepping onto his porch, he pushed open his front door. The house felt alien for a moment, tainted by Karen's presence. But then Buster, who had been temporarily kenneled by animal control during the raid, was brought back by an officer. The moment the golden retriever saw Jack, there was no hesitation, no confusion. With a joyous bark, Buster bounded into Jack's arms, tail thrashing, covering his face with licks. That, more than anything, felt like coming home. The unfamiliar knickknacks were gone, confiscated as part of Karen's belongings. The house was his again. Quiet, waiting, over the next few days, with the help of Tom and Sarah. Jack began the process of reclaiming his space, cleansing it of the violation. He aired out the rooms, brought back his family photos, and sat in his grandfather's rocking chair, feeling the deep, comforting roots of his heritage reassert themselves. The news of the sophisticated crime ring operating out of the Carter Ranch sent shockwaves through the quiet Montana community. Jack was no longer seen as the man embroiled in a bizarre property dispute, but as the resilient rancher who had unwittingly been targeted by dangerous criminals and had played a crucial role in bringing them to justice. A week later, Ethan and Lucas returned home. The fabricated plumbing issue was forgotten as they raced into their father's arms, their laughter echoing through the house once more. Chasing away the last of the shadows, seeing them run out to the swing set, hearing their happy shouts as Buster chased them across the lawn, Jack felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. Karen Mitchell and Alistair Finch faced a battery of federal charges, their audacious scheme leading not to profit, but to long prison sentences. Carter Management LLC vanished as quickly as it had appeared, a ghost entity exposed in the harsh light of the law. Life on Carter Ranch slowly returned to its familiar rhythms. The seasons would turn, the cattle would graze, and the land would endure, as it always had. Jack Carter, standing on his porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in hues of orange and purple, knew he had faced the ultimate test of his resolve and had emerged stronger. His home, his legacy, had been threatened, but he had fought for it, not just with legal papers, but with courage and the unwavering belief in what was right. The ranch was more than just land and buildings. It was a part of him, and he, a part of it, forever intertwined. The ordeal had left scars, but it had also reaffirmed the deep, unbreakable bond between a man and his home.